Welcome to the World Class Speaking podcast series. This is a place where you will learn how to present, persuade, and profit by improving your communication skills. Each episode in the series is a chapter from the book World Class Speaking in Action. And each chapter is written by a certified world class speaking coach. I'm your host, Matt Miller, and I've carefully crafted and summarized each chapter in the book. A common phrase in the speaking industry is that you don't have to use humor in your speech unless you want to get paid. The good news is that most people aren't naturally funny, including myself. However, you'll be surprised how much of a science humor actually is. Humor is learned through practice and following the guiding principles that will be shared in this episode. This is episode 18, How to Uncover Humor in Your Speech, and it's by Kimberly Myers. And Kimberly Myers is a certified world-class speaking coach, and she is also a distinguished Toastmaster and keynote speaker. Now, uncovering humor in your speech will turn you from good to great. Making an audience genuinely laugh eases the pressure off you and turns you into a likable presenter. Let's dive into what makes a humorous speech. Bill Cosby once said, "You can turn painful situations around through laughter. If you can find humor in anything, even poverty, you can survive it." Humor humanizes the speaker. When incorporating humor into your speech, you want to make sure that it relates to or it reinforces the message of your speech. And when thinking about humor, there's often four categories that can be thought of, and it's known as the 4 F's. And this will help you think about when you can think of stories that include humor. And the 4 F's are failures, firsts, flaws, and frustrations. Consider failures. When you're thinking of adding humor into your speech, audit your past and think of all the failures that you've had. Well, what about changing a tire? Did you have an experience of changing a tire where you just could not figure it out and it was a failure? Or maybe you had a really tough time doing some easy fix, like changing a Brita filter, something like that. That could be used as an example of a failure. An example of a first, think of your first time driving. Think of your first time ordering a drink. Think of your first time lifting. Oftentimes, you can uncover stories in your firsts experiences. And then think about flaws. If you have a big nose, I've heard speakers use that one before, call themselves out for having a big nose, and that could be humorous. And for me personally, something that I struggle with that I could use as humor is my inability and lack of awareness when it comes to directions. I am horrible. If I did not have my GPS by my side, could be going the exact opposite direction. I don't know north from east, from south from west. I don't know roads. I don't know directions. I don't know highways. I don't know interstates, but I do know my GPS. And that's an example of how you can incorporate some humor into your speech. And then the 4th F is frustrations. Think about your day-to-day activities. Maybe you were driving to work and you were stuck behind a bus. You ended up showing up late to work and you were so heated in the moment. You could use that as a story. Or maybe there was this old grandpa crossing the crosswalk and that delayed you there. You can use those frustrations to uncover humor. Now, the audiences love self-deprecating humor because they make us humans. Now, what is self-deprecating humor? It's making fun of ourselves. When I explain those bad directions, I am self-deprecating myself and making it humorous. If I talk about how I have such a big nose or I have such big eyes, we are intentionally putting ourselves down to get humor from the audience. The book discusses 3 main techniques that you could use to incorporate humor into your speech, and these are specifics. And the first one is called look before the line, also known as dialogue. When you're giving a speech, and let's say you're having dialogue between 2 different characters, maybe you're talking to your mom on one side, and then your mom is talking to you on the other side, and you go back and forth of you saying something, and then your mom saying something, and then you're saying something, And then all of a sudden, you look before the line and you give your personal reaction. Maybe you give a face of disgust from the comment that your mom made to you in the story. Something like that can get your audience to get a reaction and laugh. The most humorous stories are when the characters are confused or embarrassed, and each reaction to the dialogue adds humor to the situation. So ask yourself, what was I thinking, feeling, or doing after the line of the dialogue, and relive that emotion. If in the moment you were saying how you were frustrated with your mom, you can show anger, you can light up, and a lot of times that'll give the audience a visual cue that's funny. The next example is stopping on a dime. And this is humor that's all about misdirection. To summarize humor as a whole, all of humor is about misdirection. You set your audience up to believe something, and then you say something else. You twist it, and you get a reaction out of them. And one example is the list of threes. And the list of three is backed by data. You don't want to use four, you don't want to use two. The first two in the list are related, and the last item in the list is not related, but has some kind of relevancy to the previous two. Now, here's a hilarious example of the list of threes. And if this was in a speech or presentation, you all would be laughing hysterically. And I say that kind of half joking, but I'm actually kind of serious. If you were to use this strategy, it is pretty funny in a live setting. So here's an example. You're talking to your best friend and you say, I had to go to the store. I needed to get milk, eggs, and away from the kids. Something like that. Very hilarious. You want to keep the list of three, and you want to do this because the human mind tends to listen in threes. And the third tactical thing that we can do to practice humor is dialogue duty, or actually just practicing it. Comedians, for example, they practice their skits in front of a live audience all the time. As speakers, we should emulate their practice. Humor should be predetermined and built into our speech. Humor, a lot of times, can get a laugh if it's not predetermined and it's more spontaneous, but why should we leave that up to chance? If we practice and we get a strong reaction out of the audience, put that in our back pockets and then use that later on when we're giving an additional speech. Some humor on the fly is fine, like I mentioned, but most of the humor should come during the scripting phase and the scripting process, and then we can practice on live audiences. To summarize, a common phrase in the speaking industry is that you don't have to use humor in your speech unless you want to get paid. Most people aren't naturally funny, including myself. Most people learn humor. It's more about studying it and understanding how other people do it and then incorporating it into our practice. Something that's very powerful is using self-deprecating humor, intentionally putting ourselves down to get a laugh out of the audience. And there's 3 different techniques to humor. The first one we talked about was analyzing the dialogue between your characters. The second one is all about misdirection with the list of threes. And the third one is practicing in front of a live crowd and emulating the practice of comedians. Now that you know the importance of adding humor to your speech, I encourage you to think of one self-deprecating humor story and use it in your next presentation. How can you reveal humor from a personal past experience? This will be funny and it'll allow your audience to connect with you because humor will oftentimes drive connection. And this wraps up this episode. And actually, this episode concludes part 3 of the book, World Class Speaking in Action. And now that we finished the creating world class content section, or part 3, we're going to move on to part 4. And the part 4 is world class speaking delivery. We're going to start this next episode. So we'll kick off the new section with arguably the most important part of speaking, understanding why you must connect emotionally with your audience. Until next time, we'll see you on the next episode. That's all we've got for this episode on the World Class Speaking podcast series. Until next time, remember that becoming a great communicator is so important because it leads to greater impact, influence, and income. Thank you for listening and have a great day.